Welcome to the Civil War Digital Digest. I'm your host Felicia, and we are here once again with Mike Woshner to talk about the man behind the rubber, Charles Goodyear. So Mike, who's Charles Goodyear?
Well, Charles Goodyear, just to make a blunt statement, was the inventor of or discoverer of vulcanization in the United States. But I want to set something perfectly clear up front. The Goodyear that we know today,
Like Goodyear Tire.
the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, basically has no direct link with Charles Goodyear. They were formed in 1898, decades after Charles Goodyear died. They used the Goodyear name to honor the memory of Charles Goodyear and the work he did.
Okay.
So if we go back to the beginning,
Yeah.
with Charles Goodyear. First of all, he come from an inventive family. His father was an inventor. His father was a big button maker. He made buttons for the United States during the War of 1812.
Okay. So buttons kind of run in the family.
They do. They kind of run through. So he got into inventing also. He invented patented a number of inventions on forks, knives, spoons, different types of faucets and things. In fact, before he got involved in the study of rubber, he had suggested the use of rubber for washers in faucets, even before rubber could be used practically for that purpose.
So Charles Goodyear is the one who did this, not
Charles
his father.
Goodyear, not his father, right. So the rubber industry was kind of on its way out in the mid-1830s, but in 1834 he wandered into the Roxbury, India Rubber Company, one of the few surviving companies, and spotted a rubber item with a valve on it.
Okay.
He went home and invented a different kind of valve and brought it back in and showed the guy. He says, that's okay, but he says, this isn't going to do any good anyway because rubber's on its way out. Oh. From that moment on, Goodyear became obsessed with finding a cure to this problem with rubber. For the rest of his life, basically, he thought he was sent by God for two things: to find a solution to the rubber problem, utilize rubber for everything it could be used for, and also to invent every form of life preserver that he could, because he thought he was going to save people from drowning.
So really kind of his experience of seeing kind of the trials and tribulation of rubber really starts his lifelong quest.
It did, and it became very, very challenging for him, because over the next 10 years, he was in and out of bankruptcy. He was so obsessed with finding this cure, he did crazy things like selling his kids' school books, using the furniture in the house as fuel, things like that. Yeah.
So he was a very determined man.
Very determined, very obsessed. In 1839, he made a breakthrough by discovering that the addition of sulfur, with the help of a friend, Nathaniel Hayward, who was also a rubber pioneer, of finding out that the combination of sulfur and metallic compounds and heat would stabilize the rubber and create a product that was pliable, flexible at all temperatures. That process became known as vulcanization. Okay,
so how does that change things for him? What does he do with that?
Well, for several years he worked to perfect the process, patented in 1844. At the same time, I should mention, in England, another rubber pioneer, Thomas Hancock, within 1 month patented basically the same process.
Kind of like the Tesla Edison of rubber.
They were going back and forth. So we have both sides of the pond saying that they discovered vulcanization, but it became very popular, went on to be producing many articles for household and military use down through the years.
So really he's kind of changed our world a little bit with his discovery.
He did, and had a chance to showcase that in 1851 at the Great Exhibition in London, the kind of World's Fair at the time, and he won major awards there as an American, and also 4 years later in Paris in 1855, he had the same thing. And
wow.
Now his brother was also involved in some of his experience. His brother was Nelson Goodyear. He patented, if you look at this patent model, which is a model that they had to submit if they submitted a patent. This model was basically just adding sand to the vulcanized rubber mixture, using it to coat carriage steps and the tops of rail cars to make a non-slip surface. So
oh wow, and we have some stuff like that today.
Yes. He and his brother worked also on the process of hard rubber.
So they worked together a lot on some of this stuff?
I think he was much more into it than his brother Nelson.
Okay.
His brother Nelson did secure the patent in 1851, but during the time of formulating these hard rubber products, Charles Goodyear had a habit of spending great deals of money to get prototype sets created.
Okay.
He had a comb maker. It cost him 20 times the cost of regular carved combs to get molded combs created out of hard rubber. He also would have special things made for friends of his. Okay. So the cane you see on the table is a ivory-headed dog's head cane, but the cane itself is hard rubber.
Okay. And what's special about it besides it just being, a really awesome cane? It
is an awesome cane, and what's special about it is the silver band on it has the name James DeForest and a date of 1852.
Okay.
We should remember that they were not producing hard rubber items for the general market at that point in time. And the name James DeForest comes into play. The DeForest family was related to him as in-laws.
Oh.
And James DeForest in 1837, during one of his periods of bankruptcy, had loaned him a significant amount of money to get through and carry on his experiments. And he had a habit of having these gifts.
So he's enabling him a little bit.
He is. So years later, he presents him with this, in my theory, he presents him with this beautiful hard rubber cane with the ivory dog's head. So
is Goodyear sharing this information with the world, and how is he doing that if he is?
Okay, well, we mentioned the great exhibitions that he was in. That was big sharing. But he certainly did share his ideas with the world. As I said, he was constantly spending his money on new applications. He was not a good business manager. So in 1853, 1855, he published a book called Gum Elastic and Its Varieties, detailing hundreds of uses of every use you can think of rubber and hard rubber for literally anything under the sun. And what's interesting about this book is there was a few copies of this book that were printed with the illustrations on India rubber tissue on the inside, and the covers were hard rubber covers that were carved with scenes of natives harvesting the gum and processing and getting their gum ready for shipment.
Oh, wow. So we see so many things out here made out of rubber and India rubber, and is Goodyear the one doing all of this? I mean, he's only one guy.
Yeah, no, he's not doing it. As a matter of fact, he didn't have any direct, he held stock in a couple of the companies. He had no direct connection to the manufacturers other than being friends. He sold licenses for the patents, both the soft rubber, hard rubber patents, and people paid them per item produced for that, okay? So that's how he made his money. Now, what happened was there were so many companies and people making illegal goods, not paying license fees, that the licensed shoe and boot manufacturers filed suit against companies that were illegally manufacturing. And there was one gentleman in particular by the name of Horace Day, and it was targeted at him. Horace Day hired the best criminal lawyer at the time by the name of Rufus Choate to defend his position.
Did he win?
No, he did not win, because Goodyear was wily. He knew he needed somebody better than Choate. He goes to the Secretary of State at the time, Daniel Webster, who was failing in health, owed a lot of money, and he offered him a large amount of money to take the case. So Daniel Webster left his position temporarily. He went up against Rufus Choate in what was called the Great India Rubber Suit, which is still studied in some legal circles as a landmark case of the time. And Daniel Webster successfully defended the Goodyear patent, and they were winners. And when Webster got home, he found the horse that Goodyear had loaned him to use. And then he said he loved it. He found it in his stable. He had given him the horse.
What a nice reward for really kind of saving him and helping him continue to make money.
It was a dynamite case at the time. It was publicized worldwide.
Wow.
The Great India Rubber Suit. Of course, there was a big boon to economies in the New England states. Most of the New England states are the ones where they were, where the rubber factories were. New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts. They didn't develop into Akron until the Akron business community built up in the 1870s, and then the tire companies came along in the 1890s.
Okay, so you know, we kind of talked about Goodyear. We started with his beginning. We kind of talked about all of his rubber. So, you know, how does the story end?
I think the story ends. Goodyear, for the rest of his life, from the time I talked about the book and all, he was constantly trying new applications.
Okay.
His house that he had built, he had a swimming pool built into the house so he could test life preservers and underwater equipment. Wow. He also had a pond nearby the house where he did experiments of that type. He passed away in 1860, nearly bankrupt.
Okay.
But his family was okay because the patent had been extended to 1865, so royalties on the patent continued to help them until 1865.
So Goodyear's obviously this amazing guy. You know, he's kind of the story of the American innovativeness, where he's just chasing this idea because he thinks it's going to change the world, and
right.
You know, it really does. And I know you've been researching this topic and Goodyear for a really long time, so, you know, why Goodyear? Why this topic?
Well, I got hooked on it by, the first thing I bought was around 1971 was a hard rubber, the Navy soap box that we saw earlier on today. Shortly after that, I bought the rubber blanket, got hooked on the patent markings, wrote the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company about the association, and they basically told me there was no association. And so I got very interested then in patents, and wow, one thing led to another, and all I can say is I got hooked on it from about 1973 on. I had my first display of artifacts around 1975, I would say. At that point in time, I thought I had everything under the sun that had been made out of rubber or hard rubber, and the collection kept growing, and people got more interested, and I did the book, and really now I'm just more fascinated with the association of Goodyear and the history and how all that got started in those 10 or 20 short years, just kind of revolutionized the whole way we do things. Because today, you know, when you look at the rubber things around, they might be vinyl and they might be synthetic and they might be plastic, but the stuff they had back then was really no different.
Yeah,
we're using the same type of things, folding cups and ponchos and things like that. It's just, it's all, back then it was all natural material, and now it's mostly synthetic materials.
So really, I mean, he's revolutionized the world with his invention in a way, and kind of brought us to today.
Kind of took 45 years of my life into.
You've been chasing him, and he's been chasing rubber.
One way or the other, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for bringing your stuff out to share with us and sharing the story of a really amazing guy.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us here at the Civil War Digital Digest. If you like what you're seeing, click the subscribe button and maybe consider joining us over on Patreon to make more episodes like this possible. See you in 2 weeks.